My name is Stephen Hine. I'm a professor and director of Asian Studies at FIU, longtime student of Dogen's writings. And I want to begin by thanking a couple of people. Shotai De La Rosa Sensei, I'll let her say a few words in a moment. She came to Miami about a little over a year ago, and it's been a real force for developing Soto Zen in Miami and organizing this conference. So I want to thank her. I want to thank Maria, Jenny Lee, Gabby, Adam, and others in Asian Studies who were very helpful in developing and organizing this event. We have, in addition to myself, we have four great speakers today. We'll have more introductions as they come up one by one, but let me just mention that beginning here, we have Dan Layton, who teaches Buddhism at the Graduate Theological Union in Berkeley, but is located now in Chicago, where he runs a Zen Center and has written and translated extensively on Dogen. A couple of his translations, he's joined by our speaker on the far side, Shohaku Okamura, who runs a Zen Center in Bloomington, Indiana, near the University of Indiana. And together they've translated Dogen's Extended Record, which is a monumental book of about 600 or 700 pages of some of Dogen's most important writings. They've also translated, okay, there we go. And there's a paperback edition, so it's not expensive. Speaking of books, Dan has a brand new book. You want to hold that up also? Zen Questions, just hot off the press.
Terrific.
And we strongly recommend that. He and Shohaku also translated Dogen's monastic discipline texts, and known as Ehe Shingi, and what the title in English translation is?
Dogen's Pure Standards for Zen Community. Okay,
Dogen's Pure Standards. So that's highly recommended as well. Shohaku had a recent book on one of Dogen's famous chapters called Genjo Koan. Realizing Genjo Koan came out about a year or so ago, and very prominent book in the field. We're also joined by two outstanding scholars who work on the official Soto Zen translation project. Let me start with Griff Folk, who's co-editor along with Carl Bielefeld of the project. Griff Folk is one of the most outstanding historians of Zen Buddhism, who's written many articles on the history of Zen institution and also on Dogen. And William Bodiford from Griff Folk is from Sarah Lawrence College, William Bodiford from UCLA. Also an expert on Zen and Japanese Buddhism. And one of his works, Soto Zen in Medieval Japan, is a book that I've read literally 25 or 30 times, some sections of it, and I still learn something every time from it. And all these speakers are ongoing in their investigations of Dogen and Zen Buddhism and have a lot to offer. A couple of people who couldn't be here today, who would have fit nicely in, but were not available. Carl Bielefeld, who is another co-editor of the Soto Zen translation project from Stanford University, has a famous book, Dogen's Manuals of Meditation. Kaz Tanahashi, who has done a lot of translating of Dogen and has a complete translation in 2 volumes of Dogen's Shobogenzo that came out about a year ago. And another gentleman is Professor Ishii Seijun, who's a Buddhist studies professor in Japan, is currently president of Komazawa University, and was going to try to make it, but his duties just didn't enable him to get away for a weekend during the semester. Let me mention Komazawa University in Tokyo is a center for Buddhist studies and Dogen studies, and all the speakers here have had direct contact or indirect influence from Komazawa University, so we want to pay some tribute to that institution in Tokyo. And I also want to mention another name, unfortunately in a sad way, but one of the most eminent scholars of Zen Buddhism over the past 30 years or more has been John McCrae. John taught at Cornell University and Indiana University, and he's taught and lectured in Japan and Taiwan and throughout the world. And unfortunately, after struggling with cancer, died a couple weeks ago. And we were all greatly influenced by his work and his personality and his great sense of humor. And it's a sad day for us, but his legacy will continue to live on, and there will be a memorial service for him at a national conference, international conference in San Francisco for the American Academy of Religion next weekend. Okay, so let me just mention a couple words about the theme of bringing Dogen down to earth, and then we'll get started. Dogen is generally referred to as the founder of Soto Zen Buddhism, but like a lot of historical figures, is kind of shrouded in complexity, and that's a good thing, because the complexity and the contradictions make us wonder, make us ponder, make us investigate, and try to look beyond the surface and the stereotypes and the conventions and try to see what's really there. And so part of the theme here, bringing Dogen down to earth, is let's make sense as best we can of Dogen's legacy. He's known as the founder of the Soto school, but probably that designation did not exist in his lifetime, and in some of his writings that you read, you'll see that he repudiates the idea of Zen school, and he just says this is Buddhism. Let's not get into the sectarian discussions. Dogen's most famous teaching probably is Shikantaza, just sitting, or sitting meditation. And he has some famous passages where he refutes other kinds of rituals and practices that would typically go on in a temple. But a careful study of that will show that he actually does embrace and advocate some of those practices in other passages and other parts of his lifestyle. So we have to look at some of those issues. Dogen was known for repudiating literature and poetry, because he said that was a distraction in the great period of classical Chinese and Japanese literature. He said that was a distraction from meditation, and yet he did write poetry extensively himself and used a literary style in many of his writings. Another area is that Dogen was known as a strict disciplinarian and kind of puritanical in spirit in terms of following the monastic regulations. But then there's a story that he turned down the chance for one of his disciples to be a successor because he told the disciple, "You don't show evidence of grandmotherly love." So he did have the compassionate side. And these are some of the kind of complexities that make Dogen very interesting. One final comment on that point was one of our colleagues one time at an event on Dogen said that Dogen's mind works in ways that most of us can't quite imagine, because he has so much imagination and he thinks of things in such a thought-provoking way. So let's say he looks at a bookshelf and he sees a title of a book and there's the word generation. And for most of us we might say, okay, well this is a book about family tree, and they're talking about generations. Or this is a book about mechanics and they're talking about generating energy or something like that. And we might just say, okay, fine, and walk away, and that's the end of it. But not Dogen. Dogen would see that, and he'd start thinking of all the connections between those words, and he'd start making word plays in his mind, and he'd take off in a lot of different directions. And yet, at the same time, Dogen's personality exudes a kind of, at least as we hear about it, to the extent we can reconstruct it, exudes a kind of calmness and serenity and stillness. So, with some of those thoughts in mind, we'll get to the first speaker in a moment, but let me also introduce Shotai, who's been so helpful in organizing today.
This event means that we are all here to celebrate the teaching of and life of A.K. Dogen. So I would like to thank all the speakers for taking the time from the busy schedule to share with us their knowledge and understanding of Dogen Zenji. But I have a special thank you for Dr. Stephen Hine. He has been very instrumental in the success of this event. Thank you to him, to the Department of Asian Studies, who also working hard in the organization of the Dogen Conference. And Dr. Hein mentioned John McCrae, and I also want to mention him. He was a very good friend, a great scholar, great sense of humor. I remember that very well. And he is one of the myriad conditions that make this event happen. And the reason is because he introduced me to Dr. Han around 2 or 3 years ago. So when I moved, I was in Indiana, in Bloomington, Indiana. When I moved from Indiana to Miami, then I opened a small Buddhist center, and I met Dr. Hein, and I said to him about my desire to invite scholars and teachers who have been studying Dogen's life and teachings. And Professor Heinz suggested me to congregate those teachers and scholars under the same roof and to organize one event. Now, this is the event that we are doing today. And regarding the title of bringing Dogen down to earth, because I know that there is some, especially Japanese people that asked me, what does it mean that Dogen is down to earth? Yeah. But yes, Dogen has been down to earth, but somehow he was hidden for centuries, but centuries. And his teachings were kept only for an elite of monks in Japan. So today things are very different. And some teachers and scholars in Japan and in USA and the United States are doing their best to study his teaching and some to practice them. But the point is, from a point of view, that we students, scholars and teachers must give him the place where I believe he always wanted to be, down to earth. And thank you very much for being here.